This is now my fourth attempt at recording this video. I was born in Birmingham. My father was at the university there, doing one of his multiple degrees. Something I think he might have done to avoid national service. My sister, I don't know where she was born, but she was a couple of years older than myself. We moved, when I was very young. I have no recollections of Birmingham. We moved to Wantage in Oxfordshire on an estate. This was housing which I think came with my father's work. He was a research chemist of some form. A brick semi on an estate, grass patch outside with stunted, contorted hawthorn trees, probably the remains of a laid hedge, one or two other trees, sad trees, dotted around blocks of garages. Not very inspiring. I don't have a great deal of memories of this period. There was nursery school, Miss Gunn's nursery school, with the three-legged black dog whose name escapes me. It's probably there somewhere. Orange squash and biscuits, which I have loathed to this day. Failure to interact with in any way with the other children there. Running away more than once. The enigma of the blue builder's van, which is a partially erased memory, or certainly inaccessible. Time spent at home with my mother, with whom I felt no closeness with her. I felt closer to my father through his reading and making up stories for myself and my sister than I ever did with my mother. I can't say more about that at the moment. About the house, one occasion when she fell down in the garden, possibly pregnant with my brother at the time, because it was a matter for some concern. Eating raw cake mixture out of the bowl, which I loathed at the time, and I loathe the idea today. I did it because it was expected of me, it was seen as a treat. But I couldn't say that. The twin tub or single tub washing machine, climbing up the handles on the drawers in the kitchen and getting dog shit on them, bringing home a piece of cork that I'd found outside, which turned out to be a piece of dog shit, finding a tiny knife with a horn handle outside, which I've probably still got somewhere. Somebody coming to repair the hot air heating system, and lots of fluff coming out. Being upset by the fluff being emptied out of the green cylinder vacuum cleaner. Now that did upset me. I don't know why. Memories of the small town of Wantage, where we would go for shopping. The outside of the pub, a pub, the Lamb, I believe it was called. My sister was friendly with the daughter of the publican, and would often be taken there and picked up, which is in stark contrast to when we lived in a small village, when my only friend in the village was the son of the publican, and that was discouraged, very much so. But that's going ahead. Behind or around the pub there was a flour mill, which I think is still there. I think the pub's still there. We must have parked down there, walking up the hill into town, square in the town. A tea shop, and the smell, I remember the smell of that very strongly. And eating shortbread biscuits with glacé cherries on top, I think. King Alfred's statue, and the story of King Alfred and the burnt cakes. At one time a steam train in the middle. Only a small one. was that something to do with the closing of the railways? I can remember sitting with my father. The others must have been there, but sitting on the downs, looking down across the countryside and watching the plume of steam from the train work its way across the plain below. It was whilst living in Wantage that I learned it was much easier to pretend I'd heard something or seen something than to ask for elucidation, repetition. One particular occasion springs to mind, or sticks in my mind. Father pointing out a bird in some distant, partially bare trees and being unable to see it, and him getting slightly irritated, I felt, which was most unlike him, and eventually deciding just to say, yes, I'd seen it. But I remember that, looking towards the trees, brother in pushchair, mother on left, a sister on right, father in front, pointing. But that was one of many occasions when I couldn't see, or I don't remember the not hearing so clearly. But it was certainly well established. I wouldn't ask people to repeat things, or maybe once and then just pretend I heard. The sight thing. Now, going back to hearing for a moment, later when I went to school, I was several times given hearing tests, individually taken out of the class to have my hearing tested. So it must have seemed that I couldn't hear, but I believe I was choosing not to hear, or I was so used to choosing not to hear, or pretending I'd heard, when I guess it was obvious I hadn't. Later, the next school, which had been from the age of 8 or so onwards, there it became apparent that I really couldn't see things. I can remember sitting in a classroom and a blackboard being used, something in chalk on the blackboard, which we were supposed to be copying. And all I could see was blobs and squiggles of colour, which was what I put down on paper. And I then looked at the person next to me, and they had drawn or written what was on the board. And the feeling then that I was wrong and this must be hidden at all costs. Well, that was strong. The risk of exposure and attention. But it happened. The teacher would have noticed. This must have been missed at the previous school. I guess we didn't use Blackboard. But I also remember a lot of playing and not much learning at that school. That would have been up to the age of 7 or 8. But at that point, the vision deficiency was highlighted. I had my eyes tested and ended up with glasses, which I've worn for the rest of my life. Going back to Wantage. Other things around the town of Wantage. The convent school from which we acquired 2 desks. Was it 3? Was there one for my brother? When did we acquire them? That may well have been at the next house. Anyway, that's a Wantage memory. The desks from the convent, I can remember picking those up. There's more Wantage. It's not all good. I can feel a degree of hyperventilation and panic just trying to remember what went on there. A lot of non-memories. We stayed there for some years and then moved to Charney Bassett, a village near Wantage, this was an owned house. My father bought the house. It was closer to work. It was new build on a small estate in Charney Bassett, Orchard Close. No problem sharing that. It was still being built. I can remember the fascination of watching the builders moving bricks and tiles around with a rag or a towel formed into a ring on their heads, carrying stuff on their heads up the ladders, running up the ladders. Certain amount of playing with other children, but not much. An injury sustained to my finger, which resulted in the loss of a nail from playing with something around on the site. The house was a corner plot at the end of the road, biggish garden, with a stream on one side, separated by a fence. But behind the house, it's like a gully leading down to the stream. It's almost like it had been a ford in the past, in that I seem to remember there was something on the other side of the stream. Via this, one could get down to the stream on the other side of the fence. On the other side of this gully, a scabby, patchy hedge which led out onto a field, which, to my childish memory, was awash with cowslips. I'm guessing where we were was somewhere where the farmhouse had been. There was quite a lot of farm domestic rubbish around, and very shallow underneath the garden, a very large area of flagstones, which I remember well, my father discovering them. On part of the estate there were some farm buildings left, which I think are still there today. A cart shed of some sort. Modern house, didn't like it much. Didn't like the neighbour on one side. Very little interaction with other children, because it wasn't encouraged. There was a boy who lived in an old detached house in the village, with whom I was allowed to play, but that didn't last long. Apparently I was too rough and I tore a button off his shirt when we were fighting. But I never felt comfortable. I didn't want to play with him. I probably spent more time with friends of my sister's. There was an American family, 2 children who had a horse, who were friends of hers, spending time with them. Another family with 2 daughters who were friends of hers. Castell was the name. Playing in the road outside, not the road to the estate, but actually the road through the village. And the tar bubbling up in the heat of summer, bursting the bubbles. Walking to the village shop on my own and taking a long time because I'd been told not to cross the road if there was any vehicle, and there was a bicycle propped up on the curb down the road, and I couldn't cross the road till it had gone. Very pedantic and literal minded. Running away with my sister once. A circus. Visiting circus in a tent, with the clown bursting balloons on his head, but being able to see or have pointed out that there was a pin in his hat. Heavy snowfall one winter. And after it receded, finding some dry bread on the grass that had been put out for the birds before the snow and eating it. I don't remember my brother in Wantage, but I do at Charney Bassett, and I do remember not getting on with him at all. I suppose I resented him. Very uncomfortable times. I was much closer with my sister. Yes, we were close. We got on well. It was quite one-sided in that I was there for her to listen to, but myself I just tagged along and gave nothing. But it was a satisfactory relationship. It was here I have memories of my father reading to me and my sister and making up stories. Swing in the garden, trees in the garden to climb. Countryside, as I said, just through the hedge at the back and all around. That was quite a big thing. But it was here that I first went to school. And this will be the subject of another video.